everyone. My name's Ron Hookwater, and I'm the president of Pomona Valley Amateur Astronomers, and I'd like to welcome you to our February meeting. And our February meeting is really a special meeting because we're going to have Tony Cook speak to us, one of the founding members of our club, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the early history of our club.
Well, why are we all here? And I'm going to go back a little bit beyond my involvement with that. A lot of what we kind of take for granted as being astronomical that we can be involved with, you can trace back to the 1920s. And that's where Russell Porter was kind of an unusual character in the East Coast. He studied art and architecture at MIT, couldn't seem to settle down with any one thing. He heard Admiral Peary speak about the wonders of polar exploration and decided he had to try that. And he financed 12 expeditions to try to get to the North Pole by just also sharing his enthusiasm with other students at MIT, and then he would get part of the cut of what they would pay to go on these expeditions. And finally he got so sick of that, he was stranded in Franz Joseph Land for like 2 winters and lost his hearing and had a horrible time, that he came back and settled in Maine and decided he hated the cold. But he loved the sky. He was a navigator on some of these expeditions and got to learn the motions of the sky. So one of the things he did, besides trying to start an artist colony in Maine, was he wanted a telescope. So first he was given a 6-inch refractor. Problem with that, though, is you had to go outside to use it. And he really got to hate the cold. He just couldn't stand it anymore. So he ground his own 16-inch mirror and set up an arrangement in his den so he could look through an eyepiece, and there was a complicated set of mirrors that would track the sky, and he could just sit in his den. And in later years, when people accused him of being overly enthusiastic, he would, they said, "You were so crazy you built a telescope in your living room," and he'd go, no, it was the den. So but anyway, Porter, of course, went on. That contraption of a telescope made it into early books on telescope making. Some of the first books about the history of telescopes in this country, written in the 1915 or so, have that telescope in it. He also contributed articles to Astrophysical Journal on how to use photography for mirror making. Even though his mirrors were pretty horrible, the technique hadn't been thought of before, so it actually made it in the professional journals of the day. And then he got called to work at a machine company in Vermont, and in addition to making precision machine equipment, he showed his friends in Vermont how he made telescope mirrors. And they all wanted a telescope. See, in those days you couldn't afford a telescope unless you were very wealthy. But Porter discovered it was actually pretty easy to build one far better than you could buy. So he got a group of 20 people together, and I think it was 1920, and formed the first astronomy club. It was the Springfield Telescope Makers. And even today you can take a pilgrimage to Springfield, Vermont, and see Stellafane. And there's an annual convention there. It usually gets a couple thousand people. But the original clubhouse is there, and it looks like a crazy enthusiast dream place. It has a trap door, so you can, after you observe, you can sleep all day, and stained glass windows made out of actually transparencies from Mount Wilson from the 1920s, original Porter sketches here and there. And of course, he got called to Pasadena in 1928 to help with the 200-inch telescope. And one of the side things he did was create Griffith Observatory based on the ideas of Colonel Griffith. He did the sketches that the architects followed. And so when you go there, you're still seeing his enthusiasm as you walk up those curved stairs and things. It's all his stuff. So anyway, his idea was so attractive of a club that when Scientific American did an article about this crazy club in Vermont where people are building their own telescopes and projecting giant images of the sun indoors and having all this fun, a lot of people thought, got to do that. So the first follow-on club was the one in Los Angeles. The Telescope Makers Society of Los Angeles in 1925 was the next. Then the Riverside Club, and on and on. Okay, so that's the background. Telescope Club, they were actually mostly devoted to making telescopes originally because that was the only way you could get one. Now things, of course, have changed. Some of those people were so good at making it that they were able to mass produce their product and create a commercial amateur telescope that was affordable. And so some people are kind of bemoaning the decline of telescope making now, but it may only be natural. It's just like there was probably a time when you had to build your own car if you wanted one. And, you know, who does that now? Of course, yeah, who does that now? Well, anyway. But in any case, you can see the origins of this. There's a lot of roots that come out from that early stuff back then. Well, okay, now what about us? Well, I was born in 1955. Some of my first memories, thanks to my parents who took me to experience all kinds of different things. One was looking through the glass at Palomar and wondering why a telescope could have two tubes. You know, why did the telescope have to have two tubes and this complicated skeleton in the middle? Yeah. So, of course, I was looking at the mounting and not realizing that that was the support structure for the tube, but at least it got me wondering. And then I went to Griffith Observatory when I was 4, and we still have the policy, except for one show a day, where you have to be at least 5 to go to the planetarium. So I had to stay outside with my grandmother and wonder what it was about stars that you couldn't see when you were 4 that you could see when you were 5. And of course, that made my visit when I turned 5 all the more memorable. So I had those. Also, the early space age was going on then. I saw one of the early Sputniks. It was announced at the planetarium show I got to go to when I was 5, and so when we got home, we looked up in the sky, and sure enough, there it was. Also, well, okay, you know, people started launching into space. One of my first memories is walking around the block with my dad. My dad worked for General Dynamics, remember, in Pomona, and worked on missiles. And he was very serious one day, and he goes, "The Russians have put a person into space. His name is Yuri Gagarin." "Yes, Dad." And I saved the Time magazine cover that came out, you know, next week. So, I mean, there are a lot of stuff like that. And then, of course, we knew we were going to the moon. So by the time I was like in 3rd grade, I remember consciously staying one day, you know, not too long from now, people will be on the moon. Well, it's easy. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? But then I saw a picture of Saturn. I thought, but I'll never see a close-up picture of Saturn. You know, that's just too far away. Well, what happened? Okay, now I wasn't the only astronut in going through the Claremont schools at that time. I had a number of best friends. I mean, some of my first best friends were also equally passionate about astronomy. One of them was Ed Hartooni. See, I lived on Richmond Drive, which is just up from Foothill and, what's that, Indian Hill, I think? It's a block up, or 2 blocks up, something like that. And he was like 2 blocks up farther from me. So he had somehow gotten a hold of a long focal length 6-inch telescope that gave beautiful planetary views. I had a 3-inch Gilbert telescope. It was sort of a toy, but it worked well enough I could see like more stars in the Pleiades, and I could see with my eye. And I discovered the Orion Nebula one day. I remember in 3rd grade or something. So we'd run over and look at, you know, through each other's telescopes. When it got into junior, well, no, I should also mention I had another friend named Doug Northway who lived farther up, like on Scripps Drive or something. Now, Doug was interested in all kinds of things, but we used to get together and make toy spacecraft, like Mercury spacecraft, or in his treehouse we made a big Apollo spacecraft. And Ed Hartooni and And Doug Northway and I spent months making that Apollo thing, but when it finally came to play with it, we only played with it for like 1 hour, and so that was that. So we were always doing stuff like that. When I got into junior high school at El Roble, there were a group of us that would get together every morning and look at Sky and Telescope, and we'd look at the current issue, and we'd go and look at the back issues. So those friends were David Bowling, who's a year older than the rest of us, Peter Orland, Ed Hartooni, and a guy named Brad Bassler, David Coleman, and myself. But we would kind of get together and discuss astronomy and see who could sketch the most stars in the Pleiades. How could Brad see 100 stars in the Pleiades when I had a 4-inch telescope and I could only see about 50? You know, we'd get into arguments and all kinds of stuff. The school finally got so sick of us asking for back issues of Sky and Telescope that they finally just gave us the whole set and let us divide it up. I also had at the time a friend in Pomona, a longtime family friend named Mark Moran. So if you wonder where the Pomona comes from in our name, I'm about to reveal it. Well, one day, you know, I'm thinking back to all that fun we had building toy spaceships, and I thought, you know, we ought to have an astronomy club. I think we had checked out, there were no astronomy clubs around Claremont. The closest one was the Los Angeles Astronomical Society, and that was an unbelievable, you know, what was it, 25, 30 miles away. So that was, it might as well have been on the moon, I guess. So we needed something that we could get to ourselves. And one of the old issues of Sky and Telescope mentioned some club in Upland, but I called and got an elderly woman who said, you know, my son was in that, but that was like 15 years ago, and you know, he's gone now, and the club's gone. So there really was nothing. So I think, boy, maybe we should start a club. I know, I'm going to be really original and start an astronomy club. The phone rings. Pick it up. It's Mark Moran. Tony, I was just thinking, why don't we start our own astronomy club? Hey, that was my idea. I say, well, I know, I'll tell the guys at school. So next morning I go to school, and here's everybody sitting around already reading Sky and Telescopes. And I said, hey, Tony, we've been talking. How would you like to start a club? Well, gee. So everybody was on the same wavelength. So the next Friday we met, and that Friday was February 7th, 1969. And not all of us could make it, but at the first meeting was David Bowling, Peter Orland, Ed Hartooni, and Mark Moran, and myself. And then the next meeting, David Coleman and Brad Bassler joined us. And then it gradually built up fairly fast from there. Now at those first meetings, we would find some concept that we had taught ourselves out of astronomy books and then try to explain it to everybody else. Or we would find out when some event was and get together and watch it. Now if there was a meteor shower, of course the Perseids, we would coordinate with our parents and get driven up to Mount Baldy. Or if we couldn't go on that trip, then we might meet at Peter Orland's house. Peter Orland lived very close to here, up near the Botanical Gardens, and the sky was a little bit darker than at that time than the rest of Claremont. So we could have an alternate viewing station there, and we'd compare the meteor observations that we had. We would send our results to Sky and Telescope and to the American Meteor Society. And you know, just did whatever we could. Now, not everything that we did was nice. I have a section called Projects and Pranks. First of all, we decided we needed a club telescope. And there was a fellow at Claremont High School by this time named Gary Habadka. And he lived amateur telescope making. I didn't really know him that well, and he didn't join the club, but we did visit his house one time, and he had the perfect telescope maker's garage, you know, canvas-covered ceiling, immaculate grinding stands, Foucault testers, the whole works. And although some of us were trying our own hands at telescope making he was way ahead of us there. I was grinding a 6-inch mirror, and encouraged by a local telescope builder at the time named Ed Coulomb, who owned a company called Astroscopics. Used to be sort of like cave telescope stuff somewhere in central Claremont. And I'd take my mirrors over to him, and he'd said, well, you know, it's not a good parabola, but it is a smooth curve. So, you know, you've got a good hand for it. You just need to deepen the center a little bit. And he was very encouraging. I didn't feel like a total idiot. But that only happened when I dropped the polishing rouge on my parents' carpet, but I successfully cleaned it up before they woke up. So that was quite a feat. Anyway, so we decided we needed a club telescope. So we bought, for $20, we scraped together an 8-inch mirror from Gary Habadka. And then we thought, oh, we got to put it in something. So without really any plans, we put together this horrendously heavy 8-inch tube. It was a skeleton tube, but it must have been made out of uranium or something. It was something we'd never be able to lift. Then, of course, we never had a mounting, which meant that we never finished it. Similarly, Ed Hartooni was into radio telescopes, so he had a shortwave radio that first was going to be designed for monitoring solar flares, and then we thought we were hearing about 21-centimeter radiation, and why don't we build our own Arecibo in a front yard? We'd sag, you know, chicken wire and be able to set up our own powerful receiver, only that we didn't really quite know how to do it, but, you know, it passed a lot of time, I guess. Now, one of the things that we did that was kind of mean, see, Brad Bassler, who I've mentioned, was kind of the cool guy of the group. He was very athletic, and he'd beat up the school bullies for us if they were bothering us too much. We didn't ask him to, but he just, hey, by the way, I took care of that guy, don't worry about it. You know, so we were very appreciative. But of course, no good deed goes unpunished. So I had moved to Pomona in the meantime, but I was thinking, how can we get Brad Bassler? I mean, he's always so cool and stuff. I know. So I called Brad Bassler one early morning, or one night, and I said, oh, what you up to? And he goes, oh, you know, I've been running. I get up at 5 every morning now and run and all this thing at 5 in the morning. Okay. So I called several of the people in the club and said, here's what we do. We say that we saw a big fireball at 5:15 in the morning. I'll say I saw it in the north. You guys saw it in the northwest from Claremont. There's a big boom and a flash over Claraboya. Okay, see where it goes from here. So I call him the next morning at 6 in the morning. I said, Brad, did you see it? And he goes, huh? I go, oh, you didn't get up early this morning. He goes, no. I said, oh, you didn't hear the fireball, or see the fireball then? No. So I go, okay. So told everybody what to say. And then we had a meeting that Brad was at, and we, lo and behold, had all these star charts that we compared, and they show this intersecting point that must have been right behind Claraboya. Brad is excited as the rest of us are feigning to be, so we decided to take it to the next level. There was a guy at the school who's now a cop, and, well, I think actually he's a prison guard now, but he built, his name is Bruce Beckwith, and he built meteorites out of slag in the school shops at the high school. And he gathered up a lot of ashes and stuff. So we trundled out to Claraboya and dug a big crater and spread ashes and knocked down bushes and stuff like that. And we also had agreement with Pomona College that if it went this far and we brought the pieces to them, Dr. Leonard Dart at Pomona College was going to grow something really strange out of the meteorite fragments. You have to understand, this is 1969 was the year that the Murchison meteorite was found in Australia that had amino acids in it. So that was a big news thing. So we thought, well, we'll take it a step farther. So we all get together, go to Claraboya. We decide that we told one guy who didn't see any of the stuff roughly where it was, but to let Brad find it, okay? And the rest of us went way off in the wrong direction. So we're a mile or half a mile away in the wrong direction, and all of a sudden we hear, I found it, guys, come over here. more. I'm going, uh-oh. So we go over there, and I am told a photograph exists. I haven't seen it, but I'm told it exists, of all these people with really long faces standing around this crater, and one really happy guy holding the fragments of it. And I think we were already feeling horribly guilty. But anyway, it never got much past that. We took one more trip before we went to Pomona. Oh no, we did deliver the stuff to Pomona College, but then somewhere on that trip, Brad was told by one of the other people of the club what was going on. And he never let on that we knew, but somebody finally called me. And so, but he said he had the excitement of a discovery he never probably would have had otherwise, so he didn't hold it against us. Yeah, right. I will say one of the worst things that happened, and I actually still feel bad about it, was, you know, we're a bunch of junior high, early high school kids. We're pretty much on our own with this stuff. But not, you know, a lot of, if you get a bunch of boys together of that age, not all the behavior is of the highest caliber. And unfortunately, we had one guy in the club who, he wasn't inhibited at all about, you know, anatomy, we'll say, and stuff, and things he wanted to talk about. And it was bad because he was one of our friends, but a lot of us had the feeling that wasn't the image that we wanted the club to have. So, you know, the painful thing came, we all had to decide to tell him we couldn't have that anymore. And so, I don't know if we handled it right, but I did have to tell him, you know, got several of us together and told them, you know, I'm sorry, but, you know, we're not having that, and you got to go. And you know, it's hard because we're friends, but also we're something else. And so, I don't know, I hope you haven't had to go through something like that. But I did see him, I guess, probably 35 years ago now, and we probably talked about it, but I don't know, it still seems like I felt like I was trying to be an authoritarian, but on the other hand, the club might not have existed. Now, another fellow who's in the club, and I think he's still active with you, is Jeff Schroeder. Well, Jeff was one of the very early members of the club in 1969, but the way he came in was a little strange. You see, Peter Orland, who I've mentioned, is now a particle physicist living in New York, and shares an office with Mikio Kaku at the State College there. He was, of course, one of the original members, but there's this other really scrawny guy at the school who we used to see who looked very much like him, but like an emaciated version of him. So we'd say, "Hi, little Orland," you know, and he would never know what we were talking about. We were always teasing him. And finally, one day I'm in the library, and here's little Orland, but he's reading Sky and Telescope. I go, wait a minute. And I said, "You like astronomy too?" He goes, "Oh yeah, you should see my science fair project." So he invites us over in spite of our bullying of him, okay? And he has this beautiful 6-inch refractor. He bought the lens from A. Jaegers, which back in the 60s and 70s was a company you could buy lenses from. But he made all the mechanical parts himself. And it was a beautiful, rugged 6-inch refractor. So he said, "Do you know about the Pomona Valley Amateur Astronomers?" And he, of course, joined in that summer, actually. So after I was out of high school, he started working on an 11-inch refractor, which to this date I think is the biggest home-built refracting telescope. And we used to go up to Claraboya. He would test the lens by using the monochromatic light of low-pressure sodium lamps off in the distance, since he couldn't afford an autocollimator, or a monochromator, I should say. And that technique actually made it into the book, Telescope Making by Texero, is a unique solution to refracting making problems. You just need claraboya, that's all. Okay. I would say the high point of these early years was when Comet Kohoutek came by. That was the 1973-74, because that comet had a tremendous amount of public interest. Unfortunately, Astronomy Magazine, which was a new magazine in those days, said it was going to be the most spectacular comet ever. And some of us were already kind of skeptical because we'd been watching it, and it was a nice comet, but it wasn't that easy to see, and it was way behind what it was supposed to be. So we had a meeting that we announced in the Claremont Courier that the comet would be discussed. And by this time, we're now meeting, instead of in people's living rooms, at the Pomona First Federal Bank building that I don't know if it's still there, probably owned by some other government now, but it was on Foothill and Indian Hill, yeah, in their community room. They let us use it for several years. But that meeting filled up the place, first time we'd ever had that happen, and people were really wanting to know about it, and were disappointed to find out that it wasn't going to light up the sky. Now, the first decline of the club happened soon after that. A lot of us left for college. Now, I actually went to college locally, so I still stayed involved with the club, but my brother became very involved. He's 6 years younger than me, and some of the brothers and sisters of the various people kind of took over the places of those who had left. But it was still pretty much a group of friends and kind of a small group of 10, 15 or so that would get together. We had a lot of neat adventures. We went with Jeff Schroeder to see the first drop tests of the space shuttle in 1977. Went off to Edwards Air Force Base. Because we were a club, we pleaded with NASA to see like some of the early, IRAS launch at Vandenberg Air Force Base. And they set a new policy and actually let us go to that, and that was really neat. Now, a major change with the club, now I have to say the club was sort of dying. By 1978, I was not able to come to all the meetings, and now my brother's going off to college, and we're not really growing. And, it probably would have ended within a few months of the end of 1978 if nothing had happened. But what happened was David Chandler came to town. David had gone to school here, and he was relocated out here to teach at Webb School. And he wanted an astronomy club. And we were the closest one to him. So he sat down with us and said, well, look, you guys aren't going anywhere, but I can turn you around. I said, all right. Had nothing to lose. So he suggested a number of things. And actually, he put it pretty much into the form that I think you're in now. He suggested that business, at least like political business, who's running what, elections, things like that, not be done during the regular meetings, because not everybody's interested in that. That's not why you come to an astronomy club, is politics. So he said, keep that out of the general meetings. Have a special time. You're going to have an executive committee. There's some people that always like running things, and other people who couldn't want it run for them. So only get those people together, have your meeting, and then invite everybody else in. So he kind of set up the form of the club that way. And it began attracting a lot more people in. So I could go off and work at Griffith and not feel guilty that things were happening. I wasn't involved in being the president of the club or anything like that after that. But I did stay active with it up until at least 1985, and that's when Halley's Comet was becoming visible. Now, a big project that we had in 1980 as part of the Reformation was we needed club telescope, only this time it was done very differently. David organized sort of a design committee. We decided how much money we were going to spend, what we could buy with that money, what we could build, what we would have built. And we entered an agreement with Webb School of having a 24-inch reflecting telescope. David and a guy named Byron Milland did most of the mechanical work on it. And it was actually one of the first kind of giant portable telescopes. that wasn't a Dobsonian. Although, actually, in those days, Dobsonians were not that portable, because the standard construction of a Dobsonian then was a very heavy tube. And it's only recently that very lightweight trusses and things like that have made giant telescopes something that fit in a small car, say. But ours had a trailer. But it really was the center point of the club, and we would go like to Idlewild or various places, and everybody would get to look through a 24-inch telescope, so it was tremendously exciting. Another person who was quite involved here was Bob Chambers. He was an astronomy professor at Pomona College at the observatory there, and he actually arranged for us to use the facilities here. You know, for club meetings. And he passed away, must have been 10 years ago or more now, but he did a lot quietly to sort of foster the club, but he gave us a great place to meet. The only thing I failed to say about the very earliest club, Doug Northway, who was a person who was one of the first members, went on to become a silver medal winner in the 1976 Olympics. I found out about it because I was painting a house and I had newspaper spread around, and there's Doug Northway's picture. You go, my goodness, you know, I hadn't heard from him for several years, but everybody went off to do different things. Now, in the period where I haven't been so involved with the club, I get the newsletter as a complimentary thing I'm very appreciative of. But I worked for a long time at Los Angeles Optical Company, which was a telescope store in North Hollywood. And that's where I met Harv Pennington. Now, I think he was only in the club briefly, but he came to the store, and I don't think I've ever seen such an energetic person. While he was at our store, he talked to people and said, "Where are you from?" "Oh, well, I live out in, you know, like Upland." "Oh, okay, well, we have a great astronomy club there. You know, you got to come to the meeting. Here, I'll sign you up." And you guys got members in front of me 30 miles away in North Hollywood by this guy just getting people so excited about coming to an astronomy club meeting who'd never heard of this club before. Maybe one of you is those people, I don't know. But, and I know he wrote a book on Messier hopping, you know, Messier Marathon. I'm also, I read in one of the newsletters your account of star parties for visually impaired people. And that, I know, wow, you know, the club I helped with did that. You know, I was very excited to buy that. One thing I wanted to just say is the only thing I noticed, and it's not just this club, but I also, you know, actually I don't go to many astronomy club meetings now. My work is, you know, 40 hours of astronomy a day, and now I have, you know, 4 kids at home and my wife and all. It's not, and, you know, they're not exclusively into astronomy. So you know, I'm just at a point right now where I don't really have time for a club that's separate from the family. I mean, maybe they'll come here sometime, I don't know. But I do see a lot of clubs working at Griffith. The Los Angeles Astronomical Society meets there. And the thing I notice most is that they're not 14 years old anymore. And I really find that kind of scary. I mean, for me, the club was a way to grow up. And, you know, there were people I'd see at Claremont High School who were having bad, you know, reactions to whatever it was they were taking, you know, red eyes and sweaty and falling down in the parking lot and having a totally different life than I was. And I had absolutely no interest in that kind of stuff. Yet, you know, it was a prevalent, I mean, drug problems, things like that were prevalent then, as I'm sure they're worse now. But this was so engaging to all of us that were in it that I don't think, you know, that seemed interesting to anybody. And I've also heard from a number of these people. Ed Hartooni, who I've mentioned to you, became a physicist, and his experience was that even people who, were in college, even at Harvard or various places, didn't have nearly as much with scientific experimentation as we had as kids, timing occultations and reporting on meteor showers and doing that kind of stuff. Being in a club like this for a young kid is very empowering. If you get to get your stuff published in Sky and Telescope, 13-year-old so-and-so saw so-and-so many meteors per hour at last week's meteor shower. You feel like you're communicating on some level with the best in the field and all. Now, the internet also has done a lot to demystify communicating with people, but I don't see young people engaged by astronomy now. So I think what Laura, for instance, is involved with is vitally important. I don't know what the solution is. One thing we're thinking of doing at Griffith, I have a 20-year-old astronomer who's been waiting 10 years to work at Griffith. She built telescopes when she was 12 with John Dobson and all. And now she's one of my telescope demonstrators. I mean, she's somebody who reports to me. She wants to start an astronomy club for kids. And I'm thinking maybe even going a step beyond that, maybe we can seed clubs that can start. Like, tell them what you got to do to run a club and then go start it, and they can report in on us or something. We can help provide materials or something. But I don't really know what the solution is. Maybe being a kid now is so different than it was in the 1960s that it's hopeless. I don't know. I hope not. My kids, I know, are very excited about all kinds of things, and I just hope they can have as much fun as I had being here. So, okay, so that is that. I hope it's illustrated a little bit why you're here. Well, actually, in the first year or so, we did have a couple parents that would drop in on meetings sometimes. We had Paul and Melinda McAllister, who were classmates of mine, and their dad would come sometimes. But he didn't try running things. Sometimes he'd provide transportation to us, like if we wanted a field trip to Griffith, then the parents would take us, but they usually weren't at the meetings. I think the transition happened around the time David Chandler came in 1978. I mean, he of course is career path adult at that point, and is looking just for this club that he could mold and turn into something that would survive. So I think it's at that point, and from that point, then we mostly had like married couples and a different set of people really coming in. Of course, I'm by that time that age myself, so it doesn't seem like anything shocking, but it's just, in thinking about this, I just remember it was, 14, 15, 16-year-old kids originally who started it, and now there aren't that many involved really as a hobby.
Yeah.
Well, of course, part of it, I'm sure, is just the ability to see the sky. I mean, a big thing that happened actually in 1973, 74 was the oil shortage. Remember those of you oldest remember the gas lines and things that happened, and gas shot up to a shocking $1.25 or so a gallon or something, or 75 cents or something. I can't remember now, but the thing is, Claremont responded to the energy shortage by turning off half the streetlights. And there was a Claremont Courier big article written by a woman who was so excited by, after many years, being able to see the Milky Way again. And she wrote a long editorial in the paper. We had her come be a guest of our club and talk to us. I really think that's it. It's so hard. I mean, even, I'm about as enthusiastic about observing as anybody can be, and it's so hard from where I live in Los Angeles to go anywhere that's not 90 minutes or more away to find a sky that's even halfway decent now. My point is that if you look on some of the really accomplished amateur astronomer sites like Alpo Japan, where they post, pictures of Jupiter that blow away anything except maybe the Hubble Space Telescope and giant adaptive optics image. But these are made with little telescopes with webcams and stacking software. You know, if any of you in the club are handy doing that kind of stuff, let a kid loose on it and see what they can do. In other words, they may already be interested in the computer side of it, but they don't know they can apply that knowledge to actually exploring the sky. I mean, maybe there's a different route that children nowadays would take becoming enthusiastic members of an astronomy club. I don't know. Different kinds of opportunities. There was, about a decade ago, I got a phone call from 2 different groups of high school students. And they said, we're not getting any decent science at this school. Is there anything we can do at the observatory? Just anything, you know. Well, I had grandiose plans for observing programs and stuff that didn't happen, but what did happen was I ended up having them come on a Monday when we were closed, and Mars was in opposition, and I just had them sketch what they saw. And then we went over with maps and things, and I showed them the features they were able to see. And they saw the polar caps and Syrtis Major and a few other things. And they were so thrilled that they saw that, and also that they could understand, like, the nomenclature I introduced them to on it and stuff. And that was all there was to it. We didn't have really follow-up meetings or anything. But in both cases, both of them went on to college and revived their college astronomy clubs and got their equipment working. And you know, it was just a little infusion of confidence, but you know, even that can then have a big snowball effect. So anyway, do things. So, and I hope, oh, just one other thing. International Year of Astronomy, one thing that we're doing at the observatory is we are having, well, you know, we've had a long time relationship, especially with the Los Angeles Astronomical Society. It dates back to the 1940s, where they have had their public star parties on our front lawn. Starting in the 1980s, the Los Angeles Sidewalk Astronomers also have asked to join, and they also participate. But what we're trying to do this year is the star parties starting in March. There are none in February just because of, there's always the weekend of the Saturday closest to the first quarter moon, and it turns out there aren't any good ones in February. But all the rest of the year there are. The remaining part of the year starting in March, we'd like to have different clubs from the area come out to Griffith to join the public star parties. And just because a lot of the general public maybe doesn't know about astronomy clubs and stuff, come to Griffith, but this would actually be a chance to let lots of people see what you do, and maybe you get people in your area start coming here. Said, yeah, come to, you know, Galileo Hall next Friday and join our club. We hope it's that kind of experience. So you'll be getting a letter. I think it was sent out today, an official invitation. But that's what that's all about. And I hope you can choose a month and join us. So anyway, well, thank you.